Hey y'all. Last night, Saturday, June 21st, 2025, I had been working for about a week now on my little talk on Iran since I called it the morning of. I said it was about to happen and did a little talk and then went estate sale shopping. And by the time I got home, Israel was bombing Iran. Well, I had been working on a little message about Iran ever since. And last night I was working on it, and I'm still trying to, put all these different books together in a presentation for you. And I started reading a book from one of the Mimeticists. If you don't know who the Mimeticists are the ones that are the disciples of Rene Girard, who developed mimetic theory. And I've become totally enamored with mimetic theory. And some of the Mimeticists are talking about international relations. And so I picked up this book by Jean-Pierre Dupuy, The War That Must Not Occur. I read the epigram in the first introductory chapter, and I went blissfully to sleep. The first here's the epigram. It's kind of funny. I hope you can see it. It's a quote from Donald Trump in March of 1990. He wrote, or said, "I've always thought about the issue of nuclear war. It's a very important element in my thought process. It's the ultimate catastrophe, the biggest problem this world has, and nobody's focusing on the nuts and bolts of it. It's a little like sickness. People don't believe they're going to get sick until they do. Nobody wants to talk about it. I believe it is the greatest of all stupidities is people believing that it will never happen. Because everyone knows how destructive it will be, so nobody uses weapons. What bullshit." So he thinks that he's basically, the rest of this book then describes how mutually assured destruction as a deterrent is really a terrible falsehood. Where there's a certain there's a certain logic that unfolds in war that makes it. He actually goes on to describe how there have been dozens of near misses, and that it's by pure chance and luck that we have been spared the worst. Historians of the nuclear age record many incidents that could have set off fatal escalation, but did not. Miscommunication among key figures, errors of interpretation, rash calculations of risk, fits of rage, and so on. In each case, horror only just missed becoming reality. I examined several such episodes. The relative weakness of the explanation from luck, the relative weakness of this explanation from luck has to do with the fact that we do not know whether chance was responsible for the incident that threatened disaster or whether it was because of chance that the disaster was averted. For want of a common preternatural cause for this series of near catastrophes, it is reasonable to suppose that one day luck will grow tired of the coin always coming up heads, and that the moment will inevitably come. It will come up tails. Not least because this should have happened long ago. The simplest, most obvious, and most common explanation that is because deterrence has succeeded that nuclear war was able to be prevented. On this view, the possession of the atomic arsenal has only one aim: to dissuade the other nuclear powers from attacking first, by threatening them with disproportionate retaliation if they pay no heed, and, if need be, by extending this threat to a non-nuclear attack that would imperil the nation's vital interest. A good part of the present book is devoted to discussing this claim. Once again, what makes it a genuine philosophical puzzle is the lack of empirical evidence and the corresponding need to resort to a priori reasoning. Many philosophers and strategists have concluded that deterrence can work only if each of the leaders of the two rival nuclear powers has a reason to believe that the other is irrational. The chief obstacle to nuclear deterrence is that the threat of retaliation on which it depends is not credible. If deterrence fails, will the nation that has been attacked really care about, will it really carry out its threat and unleash suicidal escalation? Does one have to be mad or pretend to be mad in order to be credible? The soundness of deterrence turns on the answer to this question. So hopefully that makes you rethink Trump saying, Xi knows that I'm crazy. Trump is trying to act like that like a good mother would, that, everything's, if you follow her rules and live by her order, everything's going to go well. But if not, she may just be crazy enough to make you go get your own damn Switch to beat you with it. And so there's a certain aspect of it. I don't mean to make light of it, because I'm very concerned. Obviously, anyone is that's taking the nuclear Holocaust seriously needs to be completely aware of the fact that we have a long history of madmen seizing the reins of power. And in a nuclear age, it doesn't take much, as Stanley Kubrick so eloquently depicted for us in Dr. Strangelove, that there's a logic that would make some men ambitiously, avaricistically move towards nuclear holocaust. And so, so like I said, I went to bed last night confident that this was a president who was not going to allow nuclear weapons in the hands of the world's most dangerous state sponsors of terrorism. And so let me give you a little background here. This is kind of what I was working on here as an introduction. In 1979, I was 9 years old, and I was riveted and appalled by the scenes of the Islamic Revolution and the hostage taking of our employees at the American Embassy. The mullahs held our people hostage for 444 days, but they held the people of Iran hostage for 45 years. This brutal regime, the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, is being tossed onto the ashship of history by a tiny nation of only 7 million people, 5.5 million of which are Jews, who have made very clear to the world that they understand not only the difference between war and peace, but also the difference between war's ends and means. In this episode, I'll give you my hard study assessment of the way Israel is handling the mullahs, how they're handing the mullahs their asses. In this episode, I will give you my hard studied assessment of the way Israel is handing the mullahs their asses. But I will give you a wider view of how these fit into the international relations, while layering in many of the most overlooked but crucial components to fighting wars and winning the peace. There are two books that are the VIPs of this episode. The first will be George Gilder's The Israel Test. Now, George is, to my mind, I mean, he's one of the great, he may be the wisest man walking the planet today. George Gilder was Ronald Reagan's most quoted economist, but he's written on all kinds of different topics. He's the leading futurist. George wrote in 2009, The Israel Test, and has been republished. And I think this is an amazing book because I think it asks the primary question, which is, the Israel Test is this, what are we going to do in postmodernity in terms of relations with people that succeed, that are our betters, that are some way superior to us? Or are we going to devolve into what Nietzsche predicted, a world whose only ethic is resentment, this leveling egalitarianism that spawned Marx and all of the hateful resenters and levelers that we saw create such a terrible, whether it be Stalin, Hitler, Lenin, all of the monsters who just could not bear that someone had succeeded. This zero-sum game thinking that in order for some people to succeed, they must have cheated someone else. This Marxian dialectic, which sees only oppressor and the oppressed, victim and an oppressor. And that's the test going forward. There are only 16 or so million Jews on the entire planet. The size of Israel, comparatively in the region, is tiny. It's tough to find on a map if you don't know what you're looking for. And yet, this is a nation that has succeeded wildly in its very short history. I love what Walker Percy said in Life in the Ruins. He says that Jews are a good sign. When the Jews start leaving, that means that your civilization is in trouble. And we have to wonder as we walk across the threshold out of the modern era into the postmodern era, an era so new that we don't even have a name for it yet. We just simply call it what comes after modernity, postmodernity. We're walking into an new era, and I think that going back to George Gilder here too, George wrote in 2022 what I consider to be the greatest book on economics of the last 20 years or so, and that is Life After Capitalism, in which he kind of outlines the structure of the new economy that we may be entering upon an era of superabundance, and what that actually means for the world is really, really good news. And so this is an amazing time to be alive, and it's an exciting dawn, and we certainly don't want to screw it up with nuclear weapons, and that's why this is a war that must not come. And so I think that if we're to begin to think about what has actually happened, and of course, everything that I've written now not that it could be flung out the window here because there's a lot of good stuff, but nonetheless, everything has changed now since last night. And when I woke up this morning and learned that it had been this precision strike on only the 3 nuclear weapons sites, I must admit, my first thought was, oh no, what a huge mistake we've made. And let me explain why. The days of this regime are numbered. And let me explain a little bit about Iran. I mean, Iran, if you don't know, and I studied Iran relatively closely until about 2012 when I got off the air and really started sending my focus on consciousness, the theory of consciousness, and so which has nothing to do with war and politics, but. Anyhow, to understand Iran is to understand that it is a very sophisticated. I mean, first of all, they're Persians and they look down on Arabs. They're Shia and look down on Sunni, but yet they have a kind of a Russian inferiority complex, and the relationship between Russia and Iran is very important to understand. Russia has always had very lustful eyes on Iran, and wanted it to be its agent in the region. So a lot of the malfeasance that we actually see in the region on behalf of Iran, the sleeper cell, not the sleeper cells, but rather Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels, the Quds Force, the type of work that Soleimani was doing in Iran, blowing up our boys in Iraq. Much of this was done with the help of the Soviet Union, of Russia, who was funded and supporting Iran and the Assad regime in Syria. And so now that Hamas is all but dead, Hezbollah is saying, hey, we're staying out of this now. We just staying here. We ain't gonna get involved in that anymore. We saw what you did to Abbas, who was hiding out of all places in Russia. And so why did I think perhaps this is a blunder? First of all, someone's got the keys to the front door of these nuclear sites. And so my first thing is, oh my God, in attacking them, how do we not cause 3 Chernobyls? This is always something that's a risk. And I've not heard this question asked very well, and I've not heard it answered very well. So I'm very concerned about the nuclear clouds that are now going to be blowing eastwardly from these sites in Iran. If the regime was about to collapse, we would have gotten the keys to the front door and we could have got in there and we could have dismantled the whole thing properly. And then we could have put a big bomb in there, blown the whole thing up without there being any nuclear material down there whatsoever. However, that is a risk because we know that negotiations and international relations, almost the entire international organization, even in some cases NATO, is arrayed against Israel and the United States doing anything about this. Now, on the other hand, if you really get to know them, you will find that they are all very, very supportive of this regime change, of them not being allowed to have nuclear weapons. Even Saudi Arabia is admitting, and some of the fellows along the eastern seaboard there are admitting that no, the Ayatollah is Hitler incarnate in the Muslim world. When you're looking for line them up, They want to kill all the Jews. They have the same final solution. They have the same belief that, it's genocide. We got to wipe them all out, and they're not permitting. And see, this is the thing about the Jews. The Jews allow Arabs of all stripes, Druze, Maronites, Shia, Sunni, Christians, Chaldeans. They're all coming in and working in Israel. But that does not. The reverse is not true in many of the Muslim states. Jews are not welcome. And one of the most incredible accomplishments of Trump's first term, perhaps the most important accomplishment of Trump's first term, is the Abraham Accords, in which he got many of these nations in the Middle East who had never expressed the legitimacy or never acknowledged the legitimacy of Israel to exist, first of all, but also to defend itself. Egypt had had this kind of fake relationship with Israel, but in many ways worked completely against it all the time, allowing bad men to move through Egypt into Palestine. But look at how Egypt doesn't even want the Palestinians. They know they're all in trouble there too. So in a den of vipers, it's very difficult to understand where to turn. And yes, there's just so much to talk about. The other main book that I wanted to talk today is, well, any of them, but primarily this one, Angelo Codevilla's, or Codevilla's. He's Italian, so how do you want to pronounce it? Angelo Codevilla's To Make and Keep Peace Among Ourselves and With All Nations. And actually, let me introduce you to Angelo Codevilla, because Angelo is one of the few men who has done a synthesis of this very insightful critique of the ruling class and how this elite, primarily city people, have seized the reins of power. They have completed their long march through the institutions, and now it is basically a huge mass of unaccountable, unelected, out-of-touch bureaucrats in a far distant capital making decisions for us on our behalf. And the rest of America is the country class. And he makes this wonderful distinction in this book that really got a lot of notoriety when Rush Limbaugh wrote the introduction. And it's interesting because ISI did this great series of books, A Student's Guide to, for thoughtful college students. And one of the best ones, I think, is the one that was written on international relations from Angelo Codevilla. In this little bitty tiny book, you'll find his assessment of each of the various regions in the world. And he also has this fantastic bibliography in the back of all the different books that bring you up to speed really fast if you're going into a study of international relations. But one of the most important things that we can talk about is, what is war? Oh yeah, and this is the reason why I brought up this, is because he goes through not only all the various flashpoints in the world, but he discusses, perhaps more importantly, and this is Angelo Codevilla's great insights and his great contribution to us all, is that he realizes that for most of the 20th century, America has been winning battles but losing wars. We win wars but we lose the peace. If you lose the peace, then you've lost the war. And so what he goes through, he'll give you the history of how there were liberal internationalists who wanted to be interventionists, jingoes, and what have you, and then there were the realists like Kissinger and Morgenthau, who thought that the soft power kind of was the way of getting everything, where there wasn't, in other words, the lines in war between war and peace. Whose peace is being imposed by war? How is it that war actually achieves peace? And remember, St. Augustine, who said that the aim of war is to create a peace. But whose peace? Under what terms? And who do you have to keep killing until you get the peace that you want to impose? And how do you completely demotivate the ruling class of your enemies and make them want to surrender. These are concepts that we've lost when it comes to winning and fighting wars in America today. And I think one of the best places to return to recover these timeless ideas are Angelo Codabilla's books. And gee whiz, that was kind of a nice little summary there. So let me see if I can finish up with what I'm going to talk about here. I grew up in a bookless home where we read both the Toledo Blade and the Bowling Green Sentinel Tribune. Later, we'd get rid of the Blade because, Dad thought it was one of those commie rags, of course, which it was. The Tribune wasn't much better, but I learned to think dialectically by watching dear old Dad heckling Democrats on the Sunday news shows. My political consciousness was activated with Watergate. And even before the hostage taking in Iran, I had already received a thank you letter from President Carter for the advice I sent him in a letter I had written on first grade paper. Literally, I was in the first grade when I wrote it on the paper that had the little perforated line in the center to keep my lowercase letters below the halfway point. So when I saw Iranians back in 1979, when I saw Iranians burning the American flag every night on the news, I did what I supposed any proud red-blooded American 9-year-old kid from the heartland would do, and I made up an Iranian flag of my own, complete with that little gold lion, and staged my demonstration at recess after we finished our milk and were excused in an orderly fashion from the cafeteria. And I set that flag afire, and we danced around it and gnashed our teeth. Now, how many other kids actually gnashed with me, I don't remember. But I do remember beating up the kid on the playground who kept telling everybody how glad he was that Reagan had been shot and how he hoped he'd die. We all had peace and quiet after I kicked that kid's ass. And of course, we had prosperity, a flourishing of American prosperity unleashed by Reaganomics, and a dramatic change in foreign policy where Reagan said, how about when it comes to the Soviet Union, we win, they lose. A new sheriff was in town who understood the difference between peace and war and the means, and the difference between ends and means. And so he enabled us to win the Cold War without firing a shot. Now, I should point out that, you're not going to find a bigger Reagan fan than me, but I think Reagan booted the whole Iranian thing. I totally salute him for getting the hostages home. But it was a clear, and this is the point that Codabilla makes, it was a clear act of war on behalf of the Iranians, and we let them get away with it. And so we should never, when we start understanding the ends and means of war and the difference between peace and war, when an aggressor nation commits an act of war upon us, it must be answered. And we must always remember that we should never do our enemies just a little bit of harm. Okay? The point is, we need to be very clear about why we're fighting wars and what peace we seek. That is one of the key things. And so, let's talk about war. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Now, so much of what I have believed about war and fighting wars and peacemaking and peacekeeping has, I must say, has gone through a tremendous evolution in my lifetime. As I mentioned in my video on Iran, the morning before the war actually broke out, I said that I have come to the belief shared with Kirkians, Russell Kirk, who said that he opposed every war America ever found itself in, including the first one. We could have had our independence without fighting a bloody war if we'd have been a little bit more patient, a little bit more politically prudent, and understood that politics is the art of the possible. One of the greatest men working politics in the art of the possible was doing working magic for us in Parliament. Anyhow, that's a whole other story. The important thing to understand is that all war is a failure of diplomacy. Rather than saying, like Clausewitz says, that, and I don't think he's actually the one who said it, but that war is diplomacy by other means, or economics by other means. This is the thing that I really fear about using trade as a weapon. Is you're basically starting off wars, and sometimes wars, very quickly, things become unpredictable, and a certain chain of logic starts unfolding that is very difficult to stop. It's an iron chain, and once that starts rolling, it's tough to put a halt to it. And so, what is war good for? Rightly understood, war is many things. With Taft, we should perceive that war is the enemy of constitutional government, liberty, economic security, and the cake of custom. With Cicero, we must realize that in times of war, the laws fall silent. That with Cicero, we must realize that in times of war, the laws fall silent. With Augustine, we understand that our purpose in war is to ultimately win the peace. But we must realize with Homer that many men grow tired of sleep, love, singing, and dancing sooner than they tire of war. No man enters into war ignorantly, and no man who thinks he has greatness to gain from it will be deterred by fear. We must realize that in great wars, it is usually a host of squalid oligarchs which become the principal beneficiaries, regardless of which side wins. With Kissinger, we must realize, although Kissinger got so much wrong, we must realize, and here's an ironical quote from him, the attainment of peace is not as easy as the desire for it. Those ages which in retrospect seem most peaceful were the ones that were least in search of peace. Those who quest for it seems unending. Those whose quest for it seems unending appear least able. Wow, Darren, you're going to get this one out. Those whose quest for peace seems unending appear least able to achieve tranquility. Wherever peace, conceived as the avoidance of war, has been the primary objective, the international system has been at the mercy of its most ruthless member. With Reagan, we must realize that peace comes from strength, that weakness invites aggression, and that we can have nothing to do with the fallacious belief that if only we avoid any direct confrontation with our enemies, they will stop their evil ways and learn to love us. Wars are the exercise of power to gain power. In war, there is no substitute for victory, Douglas MacArthur said, and de Gaulle famously wrote of war that it is the midwife of nations and the gravedigger of the decadent. Losing wars is how most regimes and nations die. But let's start with one crucial way of thinking about war. War is the failure of diplomacy. While our diplomacy must be clear and simple, it cannot be conducted with rigid doctrinarism, for a foolish consistency really is the hobgoblin of little minds. Stammering fool. While our diplomacy must be clear and simple, it cannot be conducted with rigid doctrinarism, for a foolish consistency really is the hobgoblin of little minds. All of what follows here is excerpted from Angelo Codevilla's great book, Advice to War Presidents, from 2009. Whereas the diplomatic art's fundamental threefold choice, which is agreement, disagreement, and diplomacy for side effects, these are the three things that you can do in diplomacy, right? You can have agreement, disengagement, and diplomacy for side effects. And that diplomacy is truly perpetual. War's onset narrows the statesman's option into two things: victory and defeat. George Washington's twins maxim to observe good faith with all nations and to prepare for war in order to earn peace. And these are our perennial common sense that we get from Washington. Blurring that distinction really does run against common sense. As Machiavelli counseled, people in general and enemies in particular are to be caressed or extinguished. Never do anybody a little bit of harm. American people's preference for tolerating inconveniences, but then ridding themselves of enemies by short, decisive wars, is a mark of sophistication, not of immaturity. Nor does our presumptive preference for peace amount to pacifism. On the contrary, it means that recognizing that peace is a result of dealing with enemies successfully. And it concentrates the mind on what is needed to do in order to do so, including war. Because war has always held life in one hand and doom in the other, classic literature about it ranges from pathos to glory. But classic efforts to understand what statesmen had better do in war differ little across the millennia, cultures, and continents. Above all, you must be clear about the peace that you want to result from the conflict at hand. Only your focus on peace will make clear the cause for which you fight, and hence the meaning of the victory. War is a deadly contest for your peace, because killing and dying engages any regime's legitimacy to its fullest. War is the ultimate election. Diplomacy is mere communication. That international intercourse requires a positive imbalance of means over ends, that allies are available in inverse proportion to the need for them. Think about this as kind of like, it's like getting a loan at the bank. The people that don't need a loan are the ones that are most likely to get it. The same thing is true with international relations. If you want allies, you're going to get them most when you don't need them. Okay, so diplomacy is mere communication. An international intercourse requires a positive imbalance of means over ends. Okay, that allies are available in inverse proportion to the need for them, and that war is the avenue to peace via the gateway of the enemy's death or submission. War really involves killing and cowing lots of people, lest we lose our peace and our lives. In short, war's ugliness must not blind us to its premortal function, establishing peace. But whose peace? That's what wars decide. Because human purposes are usually incompatible, some people get bent while others do the bending. Hence, war is essentially a clash of purposes. Only derivatively is it a clash of arms. Peace and war are two sides of the same human coin. Failing to grasp that makes it impossible to understand the events that ends wars and ushers in peace, namely victory. Victory is what happens when somebody eliminates the obstacles to his peace. Hence, war's essential discipline is figuring out what peace you want, as well as pointing out the mortal obstacles to that peace. Only in light of that does killing make any sense. The surest path to unbloody victory is the prospect that fighting it would result in bloody triumph. But if you try elegantly to deter the enemy without a military balance unbalanced on your side, and if there's any doubt that you are willing, even eager, to reap the imbalance's fruits, if there is the slightest hint that you might not have your whole heart in the fight, above all, if the enemy suspects that substituting deterrence for fighting is itself your chief objective, like France, then you will end up having deterred yourself. Strategy is the opposite of bluff. I think that and this is what's so interesting is how the left came up with this taco thing about Trump always chickens out about the trade negotiations that he's done with the tariffs here, and they goaded him, and this is just so stupid that the left media, and I understand the importance of a loyal opposition, but when you're just looking for any reason to complain and disparage and denigrate, that's the thing. I always say that if you can't see anything that Trump does wrong, or if you can't see anything that Trump does right, you're probably not worth talking to. Victory is the natural purpose of war, and peace is the fruit of victory. Hence, the statesman must ask, is this the kind of peace that we want? Does this actually produce it? The natural functions of armies is to deal death to foreign lands' ruling classes. This serves the very positive function of clearing the way for new ruling classes who, in order to avoid their predecessors' fate, would be solicitous of our interests and police their own society accordingly. If armed forces are used in this natural way, they can inspire fear so healthy as to deter opposition. Alas, by using armed forces unnaturally as constabularies, constabularies, as cops, as global cops, instead of as warriors, our statesmen have caused actually a potential enemies to lose fear of them. Yeah, by using our warriors as cops everywhere without actually trying to win wars and to impose our peace upon people who are going to accept it or die, we've actually created a great deal of resentment and inspired potential enemies. And this is particularly true in the Middle East, where respect is the key thing. They say they want to pretend like it's all moral, but no, it's about respect. Fear and respect are what really drive the Muslim mind. So we have and will pay heavily for having lost this real sense of respect, and we're gonna have to we may have regained it, however. But through the 20th century, American statesmen largely banished the word war from polite vocabulary. They led America in more wars than had their predecessors, but they also managed the most remarkable feats. While America's armed forces won all the big battles and most of the small ones too, the statesmen, with rare exceptions, did not deliver the peace they had promised. Losing the peace means you lost the war, but losing wars after winning battles is unnatural and begs for an explanation. Losing the peace your country fought for means you lost the war. Losing wars while winning battles is hard and rare, yet American presidents and their advisors have managed to do just that for nearly a century. Because these elites are committed to spread peace and prosperity even as they wield the instruments of coercion, they would not force their visions onto the world. Hence, they all combine big words and plentiful carrots with small sticks. This means abandoning the wisdom concerning peace, war, diplomacy, intelligence, prestige, and economics accumulated in our civilization over the millennia. In the new unprecedented world, they imagine any given instance of peace was not the product of a particular victory in arrangement of power, but rather just merely the absence of conflict. They didn't understand the difference between peace and war, so they didn't understand how peace was achieved or how it was kept. And so because many of these people had it so good and never had to pay the price for their wrong decisions, they just naturally believed that peace was the default and that anybody who wanted war, and this is what you see in this emasculated version of progressivism today, which goes around stridently imposing the emasculation of our military, of our first responders, and of our men in general. Let me stay on target here. Is that it used to be statesmen knew why we fought, knew what victory was, and knew the means and strategies and tactics and how they were different from one another, and not to be confused, or else you end up losing wars. So our founding generation knew that all other peoples thought and lived according to different lights, that dim or distorted were their lights. It was their business. Our business was to make our light shine. Our right to our ways was as others' rights to theirs. On planet Earth, however, other people resent you for presuming to tell them how to live, for minding their business instead of your own. If you think you can reshape the world by lecturing, hectoring, bribing, and perhaps doing a little shooting, but not enough to really kill or cower those who have their own ideas of how to live, their own moral code, then you're drinking your own Kool-Aid. Humanity is not clay and you are not the potter. It is all too easy to mistake other people's business as congruent to ours and then to confuse the two. Circumstances make somebody else's war vital to us, in which case it becomes our business to pursue that war for our purposes, not theirs. What dog in that fight is ours, if any? What does it take to make it come our way? And is that worth the trouble? We should enlist only in our own cause. and Lincoln pointed in the right direction. Codevilla quotes saying that America is so endowed that once we get our causes right, the rest will take care of itself. Nothing quite foredooms a war as misidentifying the enemy or indecision about whether someone or something is to be crushed or appropriated or left alone. As Hamilton had argued to Washington in 1790, while weak America should look the other way, were Britain to transgress against us quietly and without bloodshed, were even the greatest power of the day to do it in a way that endangered Americans' honor, we should, quote, Hamilton says to Washington, punish aggression by the sword, regardless of the cost. Today as ever, in public life as in private, leaving no favor unrewarded and no offense unpunished is the key to respect and the rule of life that you neglected at your own risk. Unless statesmen exact multiple eyes or teeth for one, fellow citizens end up paying with arms, legs, and heads. So what does it take to undo widespread impediments to our peace? The only sensible answer, a priori, is it takes what it takes. In short, unless we want to drift into the narcotic hope that movements and regimes have prospered by whetting appetites for American blood will place themselves at risk to curb them, that those who have fought us will now fight for us, we have no reasonable choice to do but whatever intimidating, killing, starving, and humiliating it takes to dismay them, eliminate them, discredit them, and quickly accommodate whoever may dream martyrdom, and to be indiscriminate enough so that those around them will turn on them to save themselves. The logic of war demands that you do this to whoever gives you cause. When you designate someone an enemy, you may be mistaken, but failing to acknowledge demonstrated enmity is worse than a mistake. Game theorists and armchair imperialists may want to commit military forces to kill and die without a plan for peace, but the logic of war demands that the plan for getting in be the same for getting out, namely, that it be a strategy for victory. The logic of strategy requires that you constantly judge the operations you are planning by asking how likely it is that, were they to succeed, the enemy would be undone and your peace would happen. Are the tools necessary and proper to that success available? And are you up to using them? If not, it may be worthwhile to suffer in silence or negotiate such a peace as the enemy give you before fighting inflames passions. Are your operations aimed at something other than victory? Remember that phony war fools only the phonies who wage it. Are you bringing all of the available tools to bear as best you can, forbearing any of them for whatever reason betrays your people and your troops? I finished this message with the finale of Russell Kirk's book, The American Cause. For two important reasons, and those of equal weight in the minds of most citizens in the United States, America has set her face against every totalist ideology, stationed her troops on foreign soil, built an immense air force and an immense fleet, poured out her national wealth in aid of the defense and the welfare of the free world and some of the despotic world as well. One reason we do this is that Americans believe in the dignity of man, made in an image more than human. And this is something that I've learned recently, only the West really gets, that we are all, none of us are God, and we have no right to treat any other man like an animal. Outside of the West, that just doesn't make sense. Outside of the Judeo-Christian world, that doesn't make sense. And one reason that Americans believe in the dignity of man, made in the image more than human, in the revolution, one reason that we do this is because we believe in the dignity of man, made in the image more than human. And the revolutionary ideologue threatens to destroy that dignity wherever he finds weakness. The other reason that Americans know they themselves cannot be secure unless the civilization of which they are a part is secure. They do not hesitate to oppose by strength the armed doctrines of ideologues. Their cause, Americans believe, is the cause of true human nature, of enlightened and just order, regular justice, and liberty under the law. For this cause they have made many sacrifices, and they will make more. Americans do not aspire to make the world into one vast uniform United States. They don't, as John Quincy Adams say, they don't go out adventuring across the world in search of monsters to destroy. We cherish diversity at home and abroad, that our elaborate civilization and our delicate civil social order may not fall victim to the revolutionary movements at home and abroad. This is the end to which American policy is directed. And if Americans have valor in them still, theirs will not be a losing cause. If you were to ask me for one critique that I've seen so far, it is that we have not done the job of, and just the few, I know this is a very exciting time. Lots of men have been very, this has got to be a very stressful time, but we need to keep making the argument to the Iranian people that we understand that you're sophisticated. We understand that most of your best and brightest have been trained in the West, and that you want to be very pro-Western. That we understand that your regime has held you hostage for 45 years. Now is the time to rise up. Now is the time. And we're not going to tell you how to do it afterwards, but one thing's very, very sure. You can't be sponsoring terrorism, you can't have nuclear weapons, and for now you can't have your own army even. And so we'll make sure that no one's going to attack you, but it's time for you guys to stand up. It's time to stand up, oust your regime, and we are there to do business. Our arms are wide open to you. We know that you can be great allies, and that there's so much. And this is the thing. Somewhere along the line, I failed to make Angela Codevilla's point. Is that when you're negotiating with your enemies, you need to make it you got to offer them a gift. You've got to make the offer that you've given them so good on one hand that they can't turn it down. But that's only one part of the deal. The other part of the deal is if they say no to it, the consequences in and of itself is a reason they can't tell you no. If you give them both the good thing that's going to happen, which is what Iran can have, is that they can join the world, they can make a ton of money, they can have freedom, and they can also stay true to the culture that they love, that Persian Muslim culture. They're welcome to it. But this great American Satan and the little Satan is Israel. No. That's covetous enviousness. That's resentment because of your impotency as the leaders. Iranians are really super people. They're going to make an amazing splash on the world. They have so much to offer, but not when this regime's running them and running that country right into the ground. No one's with Iran anymore except the Russians, maybe the Chinese, but you're not going to find even the folks in the Middle East, even though they have to put up some kind of Arab street, as it's called, protesting this. It's very important to understand Iran is now isolated, and the Sunni world, and this is what's so very important about, go back and look at the amazing words of friendship that Trump spoke in Riyadh with all those amazing Arabs surrounding and saluting him there with Prince Mohammed. It's an amazing time to be alive, but it's also a very important time to be saying your prayers, because we are dealing with nuclear weapons here. And when we understand what Russia's very dangerous. I'm now more worried about Russia than I am about Iran, because Russia has not only, look, Russia has an entire military of tactical nukes to be used on the battlefield rather than long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles that they would launch from afar in a retaliatory strike of the mutually assured destruction. Putin is betting that he can get away with nuking on the battlefield without triggering mutually assured destruction. He thinks that we'll blink. He believes that NATO will blink. He thinks that's the point, that because the amount of tactical nukes that Putin has produced is terrifying. And so we need to make him an offer that is really, really sweet on one hand, but is also one that he can't refuse. And so, anyways, I know this has kind of been long and rambling. 50 minutes. I'm surprised the battery's still here. Anyhow, say your prayers, love one another. God bless America.